The boardroom was silent as I clicked to my final slide. 20 executives stared at the presentation that had taken me 3 months to perfect. My marketing strategy could save the company $2 million annually, and every number proved it. Questions? I asked, my voice steady and professional. Richard Latham, our CEO, leaned back in his leather chair at the head of the table. His gray suit was perfectly pressed, his silver hair styled with expensive gel. At 52, he commanded respect through intimidation and old-fashioned corporate politics. Impressive work, Lauren, he said, but something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Though I have one suggestion. The room grew quieter, if that was possible. Everyone knew Richard's suggestions were actually commands disguised as friendly advice. You'd be much more persuasive if you smiled more during presentations, he continued, his voice carrying just enough humor to make it seem harmless. A little warmth goes a long way in winning people over. Nervous laughter rippled around the table. My cheeks burned with embarrassment as 20 pairs of eyes focused on me, waiting for my reaction. I forced my lips into a mechanical grin, my voice shaking slightly. Of course. Thank you for the feedback. Across the table, Richard winked at the VP of Sales, looking proud of his public humiliation. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, but the moment the doors closed behind me, whispers erupted in the hallway. She looked so upset, someone murmured. He was just joking around, another voice replied. She totally overreacted. Richard's right though. She's always so serious in meetings. I gripped my coffee cup so tightly that a hairline crack appeared down the side. My hands were shaking with a mixture of rage and humiliation that I had never felt before in my 8 years at the company. My direct supervisor, who had been sitting 2 seats away during the presentation, avoided making eye contact as he passed me in the corridor. The same man who had praised my strategy in private was now pretending he hadn't witnessed my public embarrassment. I made it to my office and closed the door before the tears of frustration could start. But before I could even sit down, my computer chimed with a message from HR. The subject line read, "Meeting request Richard Latham." My blood went cold. Less than an hour after humiliating me in front of the entire executive team, Richard wanted to see me privately. I stared at the message for a full minute before typing back, "Available at your convenience." Richard's corner office was everything mine wasn't: spacious, expensive, intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago, and his desk was larger than my kitchen table. He gestured to the chair across from him without looking up from his computer. "Have a seat, Lauren." I sat down carefully, my back straight and hands folded in my lap. Every instinct told me to be defensive, but I forced myself to appear calm and professional. "You're incredibly talented," he began, finally looking at me with what might have been genuine concern. "Your presentation today was solid work. Really solid." I waited for the but that I knew was coming. "But you need to understand something about executive presence. This isn't personal, it's business advice from someone who's been doing this longer than you've been alive." My jaw clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. A sense of humor goes a long way in corporate culture. Don't make things awkward by taking everything so seriously. Of course, I heard myself say, though every fiber of my being wanted to scream. "I appreciate the guidance." "Good. I knew you'd understand." As I left his office, my face arranged in the same forced smile I had worn in the boardroom, something cold and calculating began forming in the back of my mind. By the end of the week, I realized how deep the damage went. Someone had screenshotted a photo of my frozen smile from the boardroom presentation and turned it into a meme circulating on the company Slack channels. "When your boss tells you to smile more, read the caption under my obviously uncomfortable expression." The comments were worse than the image itself. Colleagues I had worked with for years were making jokes about my resting boss face and discussing whether I was difficult to work with. I filed a formal complaint with HR, documenting the inappropriate comments and requesting that the meme be removed from company communications. Olivia West from Human Resources listened politely to my concerns, took notes, and promised to investigate. 3 days later, I received her response. After reviewing the incident, we found no intent to offend. Mr. Latham was providing constructive feedback in a professional setting. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at HR's dismissal email. The system wasn't just failing to protect me, it was actively protecting him. I opened a new folder on my laptop and named it Evidence. If they wanted to play games, I would learn the rules better than anyone. I started documenting everything. Every inappropriate comment, every interruption, every time Richard dismissed my ideas only to praise identical suggestions from male colleagues. The pattern became obvious once I began paying attention. Richard had a way of undermining women that was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability while being devastating to our credibility and confidence. Lauren's emotional approach to problem-solving became his favorite phrase when describing my data-driven analyses. He would nod thoughtfully when I spoke in meetings, then immediately ask a male colleague to build on those thoughts with ideas that were nearly identical to mine. My evidence folder grew thick with screenshots, timestamps, and detailed notes about witnesses present for each incident. The documentation process was making me feel slightly insane, but it was also empowering. For the first time since the boardroom humiliation, I felt like I was taking control of the situation. 2 weeks into my new routine, Tyler Brooks approached my desk during lunch. He was a junior analyst, barely 25, with the kind of eager enthusiasm that reminded me of my younger self. "Can I talk to you privately?" he asked, glancing around nervously. We stepped into an empty conference room, and Tyler closed the door carefully behind us. "He did it to me too," Tyler whispered. Different words, same thing. That evening, Tyler and I met at a coffee shop 6 blocks from the office. Far enough away that we wouldn't accidentally run into colleagues, close enough that we could both claim we were just grabbing coffee after work. "He told me I needed to be more assertive if I wanted to advance," Tyler explained, stirring his latte nervously. "Then when I started speaking up in meetings, he said I was being disrespectful and needed to remember my place." I took notes as Tyler shared his experiences. Richard's pattern of manipulation was even more extensive than I had realized. He systematically destroyed confidence in anyone he perceived as a threat to his authority. "The worst part is that he makes you doubt yourself," Tyler continued. "You start thinking maybe you really are too emotional, or too quiet, or too aggressive. Maybe the problem really is you." "It's not you," I said firmly. "It's him." Tyler looked at me with something that might have been hope. "So what do we do about it?" I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. "We stop being targets and start being collectors." Tyler's eyes widened as he understood what I was suggesting. "Is that legal?" Illinois is a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows about the recording, it's admissible in court. Tyler nodded slowly. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow morning." My first opportunity came during Tuesday's marketing review meeting. Richard made his usual rounds of condescending comments, and when he got to me, I was ready. "Lauren, I have to say that blouse is a much better look for you," he said with a smile that made my skin crawl. Now that's the kind of professional warmth I was talking about. I laughed lightly, pressing the record button on the pen I had positioned on the table in front of me. "Thank you, Richard. I always appreciate your feedback." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Richard making several more inappropriate observations about my appearance and demeanor. All of it captured in crystal clear audio. When the meeting ended, I waited until the room was empty before stopping the recording. "Got it," I whispered to myself, uploading the file to my encrypted cloud storage. For the first time in weeks, my smile was genuine. The pen had been Tyler's idea, a high-quality recording device that looked like ordinary office supplies. He had ordered it online and given it to me with instructions on how to use it properly. "The audio quality is excellent," he had explained. "And nobody thinks twice about a pen sitting on a conference table." We were building a case, piece by piece, recording by recording. Olivia West pulled me aside after the marketing meeting, her expression concerned. "Lauren, can we talk privately?" We walked to her office, and she closed the door carefully behind us. "I need to give you some advice, off the record," Olivia said, her voice quiet. "Be very careful how you handle the situation with Richard. He's been with this company for 15 years and has strong relationships with the board. Even if I have proof of inappropriate behavior?" Olivia studied my face carefully. "What kind of proof?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. HR had already dismissed my previous complaint, but something in Olivia's tone suggested she might be more sympathetic than her official response had indicated. "Documentation of patterns. Evidence of discriminatory treatment. Paper trails are helpful," Olivia said carefully. "But audio or video evidence changes everything. It removes the he said she said element that makes these cases so difficult to prosecute." She opened her laptop and typed something, then turned the screen toward me. It was a list of employment lawyers specializing in workplace discrimination. "Just some general information," she said. "In case you ever need it." As I left her office, I realized I might have an unexpected ally in my quest for justice. The retaliation started the next week. Richard removed me from the Morrison Industries pitch, a project I had been developing for 3 months. "Lauren's been looking burned out lately," he announced during the Monday morning staff meeting. "I think it's best if we give this one to Marcus. Fresh perspective might be exactly what the client needs." Marcus was a decent enough colleague, but he had joined the team only 6 months ago and knew nothing about Morrison's specific needs or history. The project was virtually guaranteed to fail without my institutional knowledge. I watched my 3 months of work get handed to someone else, my face carefully arranged in the pleasant expression I had been practicing. "Of course," I said calmly. "Whatever's best for the client." But that afternoon, I did something that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. I emailed Morrison Industries directly, thanking them for their trust in our partnership and expressing how much I had enjoyed working on their account. The response came within an hour: "We've really appreciated working with you, Lauren. You understand our business better than anyone. Looking forward to continuing our collaboration." Richard might be able to remove me from internal projects, but he couldn't control how clients felt about the relationships I had built. I forwarded the client's email to my evidence folder and smiled. 2 days later, Morrison Industries called our office asking specifically for me. They had questions about the new proposal and weren't satisfied with Marcus's explanations. "We really need to speak with Lauren," their CEO told our receptionist. "She's the only one who understands our requirements." Richard had no choice but to put me back on the account. Removing me again would have risked losing $1 million client. But I could see the anger in his eyes during our team meeting. He had tried to sideline me, and I had outmaneuvered him using client relationships he couldn't control. "Interesting approach," he said coldly when I updated the team on Morrison's feedback. "I hope you're not overstepping boundaries with client communications." "Just maintaining the relationships we've built," I replied sweetly. Tyler caught my eye from across the table and nodded almost imperceptibly. He understood what I was doing, building power outside of Richard's sphere of influence. After the meeting, I began reaching out to other long-term clients, strengthening connections that Richard couldn't easily break. If he wanted to play power games, I would make sure I had power of my own. The evidence folder on my laptop was growing, but so was my strategic thinking about how to use it effectively. Tyler's investigation into Richard's expense reports revealed something neither of us had expected to find. Late one evening, he knocked on my office door with a folder clutched in his hands. "You need to see this," he whispered, closing the door behind him. The documents showed a pattern of questionable charges over the past 2 years. Expensive dinners claimed as client meetings with no clients listed. Hotel charges in cities where Richard had no scheduled business. Personal purchases categorized as office supplies. "He's been falsifying expense reports," Tyler explained. "Look at this one, a $1,000 dinner at a steakhouse, claimed as a team-building event. But I checked the calendar, and the entire marketing team was at the Chicago conference that day." I studied the receipts and supporting documentation. Richard's signature was on every fraudulent submission. This isn't just harassment, I said quietly. This is theft. Tyler nodded grimly. I found at least $20,000 in questionable expenses just from the past year. If we go back further, we were no longer just dealing with workplace discrimination. We had stumbled onto evidence of financial fraud that could destroy Richard's career and potentially land him in legal trouble. We need to be very careful about how we handle this, I warned Tyler. This kind of information could be dangerous if it falls into the wrong hands. But as I copied the files to my evidence folder, I felt a surge of confidence. We weren't just documenting sexist comments anymore. We had found Richard's Achilles heel. I decided to change my strategy entirely. Instead of avoiding Richard's inappropriate comments, I would lean into them with a calm, unnerving smile that made him increasingly uncomfortable. The opportunity came during Thursday's budget review meeting. Richard made his usual condescending remarks about my emotional approach to financial analysis. Instead of defending myself or looking hurt, I smiled serenely and said, "Thank you for that feedback, Richard. I really appreciate your guidance on professional development." The response seemed to confuse him. He paused mid-sentence, clearly expecting me to react defensively. "Is there anything else about my presentation style you'd like to address?" I asked, my voice pleasant and my smile unwavering. No, that's fine," he stammered. But as the meeting continued, I could see his growing agitation. Every time he made a cutting remark, I responded with gracious acceptance and that same calm smile. "You think this is funny?" He snapped after I thanked him for interrupting my presentation for the third time. "Not at all," I said sweetly. "I'm just doing what you asked, trying to be more positive and receptive to feedback." By the end of the meeting, Richard looked genuinely rattled while I appeared completely composed. Tyler texted me as we left the conference room, "Keep smiling. It's working." Word of my new approach began spreading through the office. Instead of the defensive, emotional woman Richard had been portraying, I was now seen as professionally unflappable. Executive meetings that once felt like minefields became opportunities to demonstrate grace under pressure. The more inappropriate Richard's comments became, the more composed my responses appeared. "Lauren handles criticism very well," I overheard the VP of Operations tell someone in the elevator. "Very professional attitude." Richard's attempts to rattle me were backfiring spectacularly. His behavior was becoming more obviously inappropriate while mine was gaining respect from colleagues who had previously dismissed me. During one particularly tense meeting about quarterly projections, Richard made several cutting remarks about my analytical capabilities. I responded to each one with patient gratitude and that same serene smile. Afterward, the CFO approached me privately. "I wanted you to know that your composure in difficult situations hasn't gone unnoticed," she said. "That kind of professionalism is exactly what we need in leadership positions." I thanked her graciously, but internally I was celebrating. My strategy was working better than I had dared to hope. Olivia from HR sent me a brief message that evening. "Compliance might finally be ready to listen if you have something concrete to share." The tide was beginning to turn. I had been building my case for 2 months when I decided it was time to take a calculated risk. Using an anonymous company email account, I leaked portions of Tyler's expense report findings to the legal department. Nothing dramatic, just enough documentation to trigger an internal audit of executive spending patterns. The response was swift. Within a week, auditors appeared in the office requesting financial records for review. Richard initially laughed off the investigation. "Just routine compliance stuff," he told anyone who would listen. "Corporate wants to make sure we're dotting all our I's." But when the auditor specifically requested his expense reports for the past 3 years, his demeanor changed noticeably. I watched from my office as Richard paced behind his glass walls, making increasingly frantic phone calls. Whatever he was learning about the audit scope was clearly making him nervous. Tyler stopped by my desk during lunch. "They've asked for access to the expense database," he whispered. "Full historical records." "How do you know?" "My friend in IT had to pull the files." Richard's been in meetings with lawyers all morning. As if summoned by our conversation, Richard appeared at my office door. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. "Lauren, do you know anything about this audit?" I looked up from my computer with innocent surprise. "Just what everyone's been talking about." "Why?" Richard studied my face carefully, searching for any sign of deception. I maintained my expression of polite confusion, letting a slight smile play at the corners of my mouth. "No reason," he said finally. "Just curious if you'd heard anything specific." "Just focusing on my work," I replied cheerfully. "Is there something I should know about?" He lingered in my doorway for another moment before walking away without answering. As soon as he was gone, Tyler appeared at my desk. "He's panicking," Tyler texted me instead of speaking aloud. "Keep smiling." The audit was clearly discovering exactly what we had hoped it would find. Richard's fraudulent expenses were now under professional scrutiny by people with the authority to act on what they discovered. I spent the rest of the afternoon maintaining my normal routine while watching Richard through his glass office walls. He was making call after call, his stress level obviously increasing with each conversation. Whatever the auditors were finding, it was bad enough to shake Richard's usual confidence. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like we might actually win. My smile that afternoon was completely genuine, which seemed to unnerve Richard even more when he caught me looking in his direction. The breaking point came during Wednesday's client strategy meeting. Richard had been on edge all week, snapping at subordinates and making increasingly erratic decisions. When I presented an analysis that contradicted his preferred approach, he exploded. "This is exactly the kind of overthinking that costs us clients," he shouted, his face red with anger. "Sometimes you need to trust experience instead of hiding behind spreadsheets." The room went completely silent. 8 executives stared at Richard with expressions ranging from shock to embarrassment. I maintained my calm smile throughout his outburst, responding in a measured tone. "I appreciate your perspective. Would you like me to revise the analysis to reflect different assumptions?" My composed response made his emotional reaction look even more unprofessional by comparison. Richard seemed to realize he had overreacted, but it was too late. The damage was done. "That was completely out of line," I heard someone murmur as we filed out of the conference room. One of the board members, who had been attending the meeting as an observer, approached me afterward. "Your composure under pressure is impressive," he said quietly. "That kind of emotional intelligence is rare in leadership." I thanked him graciously while internally celebrating another victory. Richard's behavior was becoming impossible to ignore, while mine was gaining respect from the people who mattered most. The board member's comment opened a door I hadn't expected. 2 days later, I received a call from the chairman's office requesting a private meeting. "Ms. Pierce, we're conducting routine reviews of department effectiveness and would value your perspective on operational challenges." I knew this wasn't routine. Word of Richard's inappropriate behavior and the ongoing financial audit had clearly reached the highest levels of the company. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon in the executive conference room. I arrived with a simple folder containing printed copies of my most compelling evidence. The chairman was accompanied by 2 other board members and the head of legal. Their expressions were serious but not hostile. "We understand there may be some interpersonal challenges in your department," the chairman began diplomatically. "I have some documentation that might be helpful," I replied, sliding a flash drive across the polished table. "What kind of documentation?" "Audio recordings of inappropriate workplace behavior, along with supporting evidence of patterns of discrimination and possible financial irregularities." The legal representative leaned forward with obvious interest. "How much evidence are we talking about?" "Approximately 3 months of recorded conversations, along with expense report discrepancies totaling over $30,000. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "Everything you need is on here," I said, gesturing to the flash drive. The corporate investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Professional auditors and HR specialists descended on our department, interviewing employees and reviewing years of financial records. Richard initially tried to maintain his usual confident demeanor, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The audio recordings made his pattern of inappropriate behavior impossible to deny, while the financial documents revealed systematic fraud spanning multiple years. I was called in for a formal interview with the investigation team. They listened to my recordings, reviewed my documentation, and asked detailed questions about the workplace environment Richard had created. "This level of documentation is extraordinary," the lead investigator commented. "Most harassment cases rely on he said she said testimony. You've provided clear, objective evidence." I answered their questions calmly and thoroughly, providing context for each incident and identifying witnesses who could corroborate my accounts. "How long has this pattern of behavior been ongoing?" "Based on conversations with other employees, at least 3 years. Possibly longer." The investigators exchanged meaningful looks. They had clearly heard similar stories from other witnesses. "Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Your cooperation has been invaluable. We'll be in touch regarding our findings." As I left the interview room, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The truth was finally being heard by people with the power to act on it. Richard's downfall began the following Tuesday. He had called an emergency all-hands meeting, apparently attempting to reassert control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his reach. "I want to address some rumors that have been circulating," he began, his voice carrying less authority than usual. "There have been some unfounded allegations." His phone buzzed on the podium. He glanced at it dismissively, then stopped mid-sentence as he read the message. The color drained from his face. Excuse me for a moment," he stammered, looking around the room with obvious panic. We all watched as he tried to compose himself, but whatever he had read on his phone had shattered his remaining confidence. "The meeting is. We'll reschedule," he said weakly, leaving the podium without explanation. Within an hour, security guards appeared at Richard's office. Through the glass walls, we could see them watching as he packed his personal belongings into cardboard boxes. The entire floor buzzed with whispered conversations and nervous energy. Everyone knew something significant was happening, but details were scarce. Tyler appeared at my desk with wide eyes. "He's been suspended pending the investigation results." I watched through my office window as Richard walked past, flanked by security guards, carrying his box of personal items. He didn't look at anyone. After 15 years of wielding power through intimidation and manipulation, Richard Latham was being escorted from the building in disgrace. The official announcement came the next morning. The board had voted to terminate Richard's employment effective immediately, citing violations of company policy and potential criminal conduct. Details of the financial fraud began leaking to industry publications. Trade journals reported that Richard had systematically stolen from the company while creating a hostile work environment for employees who might have discovered his activities. The board chairman called an emergency meeting to address leadership transition and restore confidence in the company's management. "We're committed to rebuilding trust and maintaining the highest standards of ethical conduct," he announced to the assembled staff. After the general announcement, several executives were called into private meetings. I was among them. "Ms. Pierce, the board has been discussing interim leadership structure for the marketing department. We'd like to offer you the position of acting director." The offer was both thrilling and terrifying. This was the promotion I had been working toward for years, but it was coming under circumstances I had never imagined. The role would include full departmental authority and a substantial salary adjustment. "We believe your leadership style represents exactly the kind of change this company needs." I looked around the room at faces that had once dismissed my potential, now looking at me with respect and anticipation. "I'll take it," I said, allowing myself a small, satisfied smile. News of Richard's termination and my promotion spread quickly through industry networks. Within days, my phone was buzzing with calls from reporters, headhunters, and former colleagues who wanted details about what had really happened. I declined all media interviews, focusing instead on stabilizing the department and rebuilding team morale. The atmosphere in our office changed dramatically almost overnight. Without Richard's constant undermining and inappropriate behavior, productivity improved significantly. Team members who had been afraid to speak up began contributing ideas and taking initiative. Tyler was promoted to senior analyst in recognition of his role in uncovering the financial fraud. Several other employees received overdue promotions and salary adjustments that Richard had been blocking. "You changed this place," Olivia from HR told me during one of our weekly check-ins. "The entire culture is different." The truth was that I hadn't changed the company culture so much as removed the toxic element that had been poisoning it. With Richard gone, people were free to do their best work without fear of arbitrary punishment or humiliation. My leadership style was everything Richard had mocked: collaborative, data-driven, focused on developing talent rather than crushing it. And it was working better than anyone had expected. Within 3 months, our department's performance metrics reached all-time highs while employee satisfaction scores improved dramatically. 6 months after Richard's termination, the board made my position permanent. The interim title was removed, and I became the youngest department director in company history. The ceremony was held in the same boardroom where Richard had first told me to smile more. As I accepted the official appointment, I thought about how much had changed since that humiliating day. "Lauren has demonstrated exactly the kind of ethical leadership and professional excellence we value," the chairman said during his remarks. "Her transformation of the marketing department has been remarkable." After the formal announcements, several board members approached me privately to discuss expanded responsibilities and future opportunities. "We're considering you for VP of Marketing when the position opens next year," one board member confided. "Your track record speaks for itself." I accepted their congratulations graciously, but my mind was already focused on the future. There was still work to do, people to develop, and systems to improve. That evening, I stayed late to review performance data and plan for the upcoming quarter. As I worked, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Richard had tried to diminish me with his demand for constant smiling, thinking it would make me smaller and more compliant. Instead, it had taught me the power of composure under pressure, a skill that had ultimately made me stronger than he ever was. A year later, I received news that Richard had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement. The investigation had uncovered over $200,000 in fraudulent expenses spanning 5 years. Several news outlets covered the story, focusing on the broader issues of corporate fraud and workplace harassment. A few articles mentioned my role in exposing the misconduct, though I continued to decline interview requests. The real victory wasn't Richard's punishment, it was the transformation of our workplace culture. We had implemented mentorship programs, anonymous reporting systems, and regular culture assessments to prevent future abuse. My department had become a model for other divisions in the company. Employee retention was at an all-time high, and our recruitment efforts attracted top talent from across the industry. I opened a new folder on my laptop and titled it Future Leaders. It contained development plans for promising employees who reminded me of my younger self, talented people who just needed someone to believe in their potential. Tyler had been accepted to an MBA program and would be leaving at the end of the year. His replacement was a brilliant young woman who had been overlooked by previous management. "You're giving me the opportunity Richard never gave you," she said during her first week. "That's exactly the point," I replied. "We break the cycle by doing better." The evidence folder still existed on my laptop, but I hadn't opened it in months. It served as a reminder of how far we had come. 2 years after Richard's downfall, I was promoted to Vice President of Marketing. The announcement was made in the same boardroom where everything had started. As I looked around the table at faces that now treated me with genuine respect, I remembered the terrified woman who had forced a smile while being publicly humiliated. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to transform adversity into opportunity. My leadership philosophy was simple. Create an environment where talented people could thrive without fear of arbitrary punishment or discrimination. The results spoke for themselves. Our department's revenue contributions had increased by 40% under my leadership. Employee satisfaction scores were consistently the highest in the company. We had become the destination for ambitious professionals who wanted to work for ethical leaders. "You've revolutionized how we think about management development," the CEO told me during my promotion celebration. "Your approach should be the template for the entire company." I accepted the praise graciously while internally planning the next phase of culture transformation. There was still work to do, but we had proven that positive change was possible when good people refused to accept toxic behavior. My smile that day was completely genuine, not forced or performative, but born of real satisfaction and hope for the future. Today, as I walked past the boardroom where Richard had first humiliated me, I paused to look at the new nameplate on my office door: Lauren Pierce, Chief Executive Officer. The board had chosen me to lead the company after our previous CEO retired early. At 35, I was the youngest CEO in the organization's history. My reflection in the polished nameplate showed a confident woman who had learned to weaponize the very qualities that others had tried to use against her. The smile Richard had demanded as a tool of subordination had become a symbol of unshakable composure. The emotional intelligence he had mocked as weakness had proven to be the foundation of effective leadership. In my briefcase was a speech I would deliver at tomorrow's leadership conference, sharing our company's transformation story with other business executives. The title was simple: Leading with Authenticity, How Ethical Culture Drives Performance. I would talk about creating psychological safety, developing talent, and building trust through consistent behavior. I would not mention Richard by name, but his absence would be implicit in everything I described. As I reached my new corner office with its panoramic view of Chicago, I allowed myself one moment of private satisfaction. He had told me to smile more during meetings. So I did. Every single day until he was gone, and every day since then as I built something better in his place.